So welcome. I'm so excited today to be joined by a really good friend of mine and Dr. Joanne McCormack. I've worked with her for a couple of years. I met her through the Public Health Collaboration, a brilliant charity that Sam Felton was one of the founding members. And she's doing loads of things about nutrition, health, and her passion about getting people off sugar and getting people, diabetics, off their medication. You're going to notice as it's coming through today's interview. So she's worked with us with the Charity Rewards Project and helping us on the book Kick Sugar. I understand about sugar and what happens in the mouth, but once it gets swallowed, I'm a bit clueless. So medical expert Joanne McCormack, who's a GP, worked in Cheshire for 25 years, I think it is now. She's also got a website called Fat is My Friend. She'll talk about that later on. But she runs lots of small groups to getting people off sugar and healthier and off their medication. So welcome, Joanne.
Yeah, thanks very much for asking me to talk.
No, brilliant. So we've had loads and loads of questions. Obviously, you've had some day-to-day as a GP, but I mean, the first question I'd love to ask you is just tell me why sugar is so bad for our bodies.
Well, not a lot of people know that in the whole of our bodies, about 1 teaspoon of sugar is dissolved in our bloodstream, which is hardly anything. So the trouble with the modern Western diet is that people have food for breakfast, dinner and tea and snacks that break down to sugar very readily. So for instance, if I think about myself, I used to have a breakfast of cereal or toast, sometimes with some orange juice. And I used to think that was a healthy breakfast. But I once worked out that for my breakfast, I probably was consuming something like the equivalent of 20 teaspoons of sugar after I considered the cereal and sometimes a piece of brown toast, brown cereal, and orange juice or apple juice, which is an awful lot of sugar for the body to cope with. Particularly if you have a similar sort of thing at lunch and dinner and maybe some snacks in between, your pancreas, which produces insulin every time you eat, is really put under a lot of strain by having to produce all this insulin several times a day. So now I've switched over to having eggs for breakfast, and if I have eggs and maybe some spinach or tomatoes, something like that, that's really, often I'm only having maybe no teaspoons equivalent of sugar at all, or and still having a very filling breakfast.
And what do you find your patients sort of notice the first things when they cut down on sugar or processed foods? What are their sort of feelings they notice the quickest? How long does it take for them to notice a change in their bodies?
I'd say even within a day, they notice things like that their teeth feel better, that they don't have the coating on their teeth. They often feel they've got more energy. They, even within a few days, I mean, certainly I think in terms of a week, because I usually see people initially, and then I see them a week later. Often my groups run weekly, or they feed back to me within a week. And they will say things like they've lost an awful lot of weight. I mean, the first week, if they've got weight to lose, they might lose half a stone.
Wow.
Not all of my patients are overweight. Some of them just have a problem with diabetes. I say just a problem with diabetes because it is a very serious condition. But some of my patients are normal weight but diabetic. And when they cut the starchy foods from their diet and the sugary foods from their diet, they notice the blood sugars normalise, can normalise within a day or so. Or maybe even within a meal, if they have a meal that's just eggs and spinach, for instance, and they might see that the blood sugar, just goes up to 7 or 8. Whereas if they have a meal of cereal or toast or porridge, they might notice the blood sugar goes up to 11 or 12, which is, well into the diabetic range. So they do, when they check the blood sugars, they do recognize that those are much more stable when they eat foods, natural foods like meat or fish or eggs, vegetables, as long as they're not starchy ones, leafy green veg.
You mentioned about blood sugar and the levels. What's the sort of the correct level for a normal person who's not diabetic or pre-diabetic?
Yeah, so between 4 and 7 on the whole, although sometimes, people might get levels in the sort of 3s and they still feel fine. But I generally go for between 4 and 7.
And have you noticed that some of your diabetic patients, I'm talking about type 2 diabetics at the moment, have they managed to come off medication by changing diet?
Yes, yes, they do, and it's quite amazing. And not everybody manages it, but I've had people who've gone from being really very badly controlled to having completely normal blood sugars, where their blood sugar profile is just like a normal person, through just changing what they eat, which is just fabulous. I never knew that could happen. I'd say prior to 2014, I had no awareness that people could reverse the diabetes to that extent.
So you're finding that some of your patients are coming off medication, which is obviously taking the pressure off the NHS and also less complications for them as well.
Yes, I mean, they're delighted. They're just so pleased they don't need to take any medication. And they feel so much better in themselves. They've got more energy. They are not worried about their health. They're not having to go for doctor's appointments, nurse appointments, blood tests. They just manage it themselves at home.
And how long is it? What's the time frame from when they first see you and then they sort of commit to changing their diet before they can sort of cut down on medication? Is it quite quick, or?
Yes, well, that's a really good question. Depending on what sort of medication they're on, sometimes they have to decrease it immediately when they change to this sort of eating. So actually at the same time. So often they're halving the medication or even stopping it, and depending on what it is. But if I think about somebody who's at the far end of the scale in terms of poor control, we're really thinking about 2 or 3 months to actually get it really well into control. But I am aware that some people have done it more quickly than that. Yeah, I mean, if they're on insulin, for instance, or if they're on what are called oral hypoglycemic drugs, and they can be on 50% of the drugs within a week.
Wow.
Which is pretty good.
And how do they do it? They do it
probably more into the maybe 2 or 3 months tops.
And your advice is to go to their GP first and have a chat about how to cut down the medication, or can they do it on their own?
Well, I have a letter that I give out to them, which is for them and for their doctor or nurse, which gives them rough guidance on cutting down the medication. It also advises them to get a blood sugar meter. If they can get the 24-hour meter, that's fantastic. The Freestyle Libre. But if they can't get that, then just an ordinary blood sugar machine, and I advise them to check the blood sugars an hour and a half after. But I do ask them to do it with their own doctor or nurse as well, with their approval and support. But some people do it by themselves. It depends how much they understand the diabetes, because some people understand the diabetes really well and they get this message loud and clear and they just go for it and change. And when they do that, they can gradually cut down the medication and beyond. They have to do the initial 50% less, but then after that they gradually cut it down as the blood sugars normalise.
We talked about type 2 diabetics, but I know that some doctors are getting some good results with type 1 diabetics. I know it's a lot more complicated, but how does a changing of lifestyle and diet help them as well?
Well, that's a very good question. So one of our members in the public health collaboration, one of our doctors, is a type 1 diabetic, Dr. Ian Lake. And he discovered for himself that when he cut down his carbohydrate, he needed less insulin, and he got less hypos, and he got less high levels. And so diet's always a choice, isn't it? What we eat is a choice, what sort of diet we have, and we can choose to have foods that affect our blood sugar less. So for instance, I never eat sugar. I never eat cereals now, even things like bran flakes or shredded wheat or Weetabix, even though they've got a sort of healthy sort of image. Or I do eat porridge. But if a diabetic person eats porridge made with milk, and often their blood sugar goes up too high. So a lot of diabetic people will choose to change from cereal to eggs. And a type 1 diabetic person, if he or she changed to things like eggs or say plain yogurt with some berries or some almonds or something like that in it for breakfast, they would find that the blood sugar went up less. So a type 1 person, can just choose to live like that, and then they will get less hypos and they'll get less highs and they'll need less insulin. I mean, they need something like about a third to a half of the insulin on a low carb diet as on a high carb diet.
Wow.
And one of my patients, my first patient who did that, hadn't even met me, and he just heard secondhand that that was an option. And some people just do that. They just do it themselves. They gradually just cut their carbs and the sugars because they realize they affect their blood sugar, you know, they affect the health too much. And then it's got wonderful spin-offs. I mean, I've needed a lot, on a personal level, I've needed a lot less dentistry since I changed my diet in 2014. A lot less, and even on a daily basis. I think one of the things is which is difficult, is a lot of the reasons you're doing this is to prevent long-term problems. But for somebody who's a type 1 diabetic, you're preventing short-term ones as well. On a daily basis, you can see that your blood sugar is more stable, you're having less hypos, you're having to have less sort of sugar or whatever, you're having like jelly babies or whatever to actually bring your sugar up, you're having to have less insulin to bring your sugar down, and you're just feeling altogether more in control.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, what we talk about in the challenge is all the different things to monitor. So it's not just, for some people, it's not looking at the blood sugar levels, it's also just their mood and their skin. And I've had quite a few patients who said to me after 3 or 4 days, their skin feels less oily and less greasy. Their energy levels, that's something that notices really different. And sometimes with me, if it's a birthday party or something and I have a piece of cake, I really do notice it about 40 minutes later. First of all, the cake tastes so much sweeter than I ever imagined it ever took. Once you cut down on the sugar and the carbs, you really do notice the taste. But then afterwards, about 40 minutes later, I feel really tired and lethargic. So, I mean, it's something that you can play around with your diet, but listen to your body and you'll get signs and symptoms. And it's whether you ignore those or actually think, aha, I just had that. And now 40 minutes later, this is how I feel. So trying to think. So I 100% agree with that. We get lots of people asking at the moment about immune system. And obviously there's loads of studies saying sugar and carbs can actually increase your body inflammation. But how does it affect your immune system? Have you noticed anything about that?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So a lot of people, a lot of people who are pre-diabetic or diabetic get repeated infections. And so one of the things we see is people get sores that don't heal, or they might have, you know, like a frozen shoulder, which doesn't recover, just keeps, you know, minor injury to the shoulder, and they just have this inflammation that goes on for months and months. And it's often a marker of somebody becoming pre-diabetic. And so when people control the blood sugar, they get less infections. And we notice that most with skin infections. But people sometimes report that they get less viruses, you know, less upper respiratory infections. Mm-hmm. And the body just isn't very good at healing in the presence of too high a sugar level. It's very important for the body to try and keep its sugar level between 4 and 7. So if you wake up in the morning and you don't have anything to eat, your body makes sugar. So one of the questions I get from people is, oh, I've spoken to my friend and he says your body needs sugar. And I say, do you know what? Your body does need sugar, and it's such an important thing that your body makes it. So if you don't have any breakfast in the morning, when you're waking up in the morning, your body makes sugar. So a lot of diabetics find that when they check the blood sugar before breakfast, it can actually be quite high. It can be outside the 4 to 7. It could be 8 or 9, depending on what they've had to eat the night before. But even if they've had something low carb the night before, the blood sugar might be 6.5 before they eat anything. And as I'm a non-diabetic, but you know, my blood sugar in the morning could be 4 or 5. It's not going to be in my boots. It's going to, you know, going to make sugar. My body makes sugar. So yes, your question was really about infections. So yes, in the presence of sugar, too much sugar, the body doesn't heal properly, and the body lacks the ability to fight infections as well. And we see that with COVID, that people who are diabetic, who've got other things like obesity, hypertension, do less well with COVID than people who are metabolically normal.
you've been talking about pre-diabetics, and you mentioned that one of the tests that you could do, or if you're not sure, is obviously if skin conditions don't heal as well, or as you said, you mentioned frozen shoulders. For people listening, if they're not sure they may be pre-diabetic, obviously the best test is go to the doctor and get blood tests. But is there any other things they should be looking out physically to give them some ideas that maybe their sugar levels are too high?
And that's a very good question. So when people's sugar levels are too high, they might feel thirsty, they might be passing a lot of urine. And at the moment, of course, it's quite difficult to get into the doctors. I mean, I had a query from somebody just sort of before our 5 minutes before our call, just saying they were ill and what could they do. But in terms of if you felt that you might be pre-diabetic or diabetic, obviously consult your doctor, and you can do e-consults very easily now. But if you don't feel so bad and you're just curious and you're just wondering what your blood sugar is like, you can buy a blood sugar meter on the internet for about £15, and it will come with some sticks, and you can check your blood sugar in different scenarios. And I suggest people check it first thing in the morning, and about an hour and a half after they've eaten. And people can experiment, they can have a meal with, you could say, have a meal, you might have pasta and chicken or something like that, and check your blood sugar an hour and a half after. Or you might have a meal of cereal and orange juice and see what happens. And then have a different meal, which is much lower in sugar, much lower in carbs, such as, like I said before, like eggs and spinach, or yogurt and some berries, and check your blood sugar an hour and a half after that and just see. And you might be surprised. So if your blood sugar after a meal was higher than 7, then it's worthwhile, telling your doctor and going along. But now with the home testing kits, it's very easy to find out, what's happening with your blood sugar, whether you're pre-diabetic or diabetic or non-diabetic.
And how often do you sort of encourage people to check? Is there sort of a certain age after maybe 40 you should get it checked every 5 years, like the sort of well man, well woman test, or is it just if you're curious?
Well, that's a very good question. I don't have a set period of, an age where people do it, partly because people develop metabolic problems at different times. So, I mean, you can get a teenager or a child even at primary school who develops metabolic problems. The general thing would be putting on weight, so having tummy weight. Obviously feeling unwell would be, talking about passing a lot of urine or feeling thirsty, or weight loss, which can happen, and then you should consult your doctor. But if you just notice that you feel reasonable, but you're putting weight on around your tummy and you can't really lose weight easily, then I would suggest that's a good time to just buy a blood sugar machine and check your blood sugars, go and see your doctor and discuss it. Because once people start putting weight on around their tummies, it's an indication that metabolically they're not doing so well. That's the body's trying to protect itself. So my website's called Fat is My Friend. I'm trying to encourage people to see their body fat as a body's protective mechanism. That fat is formed to try and take extra sugar out of your bloodstream to protect you from harm. So whenever you've eaten something that makes your blood sugar too high, your body very cleverly converts that sugar into fat, and chiefly around your middle. And that fat around your middle will build up gradually over time. And when your body ceases to be able to turn that sugar into fat, that's called reaching your fat threshold. And after that, your blood sugar itself will rise, and then your doctor would be able to tell you that you've become diabetic. But we don't want to get to that stage. So once you start accumulating weight around your tummy, then that would be a time to try and think, what's going on here and what can I do about it?
Brilliant. Are there any other sort of tips you give to your patients on sort of getting off sugar and changing your diet? Because I know I get a lot of people who sort of do a few days, feel better, but then they go back a bit and then they think, oh no, I feel bad, I've just had this cake or whatever. How do I get back on it? Are there any tips for people to sort of keep on the path of low carb or healthy eating?
Yeah, so the first thing we do is we talk about hope. And this is an idea that's come from Dr. Jen Unwin, who's a psychologist. So hope as in what you hope what are your hopes? What are your hopes and dreams for your health? As in a year from now, you're not healthier. What does healthier mean to you? So it will mean things like, well, my shoulder won't ache anymore. You know, I'll be able to go back to playing tennis, or I'll be able to go and push the pram along, you know, and not feel my shoulders aching. Or I'll be able to reach behind me and pick something up without it hurting. Or it might mean my eczema will be a lot better. Because what I find over time is people accumulate illnesses. So a baby will start off and generally be fit and well, and then maybe in toddlerhood the baby might start to get eczema. Maybe in primary school life he or she might get asthma, and then maybe as a teenager he might get IBS, and then or Paris thought Crohn's or something awful like that. And then in the 20s and 30s and 40s, people gradually accumulate all these illnesses. So by the time they're in the 50s, people can have maybe 4 or 5 chronic conditions. And so that would be my classic patient who's on a whole range of drugs for a whole range of conditions. But increasingly over time, I'm seeing people, you know, presenting, you know, younger and younger. So sorry, what was the original question? Sorry.
It's all about having tips and ideas to get people healthier and off sugar, and then keeping them there, because people sort of swing.
So it's your hopes for your health. So it might be your asthma going away. It might be your irritable bowel calming down. It might be your eczema resolving and your skin looking nice and fresh. It might be simple things, not a condition, but more a feeling. So it might be a feeling you don't get any headaches anymore, or it might be a feeling that you've got more energy generally. It might be a feeling that your brain is much more fresh. And the idea is that you think about those hopes a year from now, and you consider what you'll be doing a year from now, which clothes you'll be wearing, which people you'll be with, what sort of activities you'll be doing, which is obviously rather interesting during COVID, because hopefully a year from now we'll have less restriction. We'll be able to travel and see our friends and family and hug them and things like that. But that is what I try and use to help people motivate themselves. So people have said to me things like, a year from now I'll be able to climb the bridge which you have to walk up to when you're going to the bus stop. Very simple. Or I'll be able to bend down and pick up my grandchildren. Or one lady said she'd be able to ride in a camel because it'd been her lifelong dream to ride in a camel. And another lady said she would like to be able to confidently go to a football match and walk through the turnstiles because she'd previously got stuck in them.
Wow.
Yeah. Brilliant. And a lot of people have got hopes and dreams along the lines of stopping medication. That's a really common one, and very common to feel they've got more energy, because a lot of my patients who've got maybe 3 or 4 chronic conditions have got no energy and they feel pretty bad and they think it's just their lot for life. But I tell them, well, you know, there are people who've been on more medication than you, and with these lifestyle changes they've managed to come off everything gradually, and that gives them a lot of hope.
Brilliant.
So it's
hope. And I like the fact you talked about headaches, because that's one of the common things that I hear when people go through sort of low carb, getting off sugar, getting rid of refined foods. They really do notice that the first symptoms they often get, they get the big energy, they feel different, but a lot of people get headaches maybe after day 5 or 6.
That's a really good point, isn't it? So that's true, unless you cut down very slowly, and it's quite a dilemma, really. It's a very personal thing whether you cut down gradually or whether you cut down quickly. So if you cut down quickly, and by quickly I mean, you know, if you change overnight, if you just had a diet that was quite high in carbs, and I do suggest people work it out from a book called Carbs and Cals and actually work out how much they're having and gradually cut it down. Over time, I've gradually moved over to suggesting most people are best cutting it down gradually, because if you cut it down very, very slowly, you probably won't get any headaches. And I have had some people who've changed overnight and cut everything out, and they've had really very severe, not just headaches, but lethargy, dizziness, felt very fluey. It's a massive shock for the body. So over time, I've gradually moved towards really nudging people to gradually cut it out. I mean,
yeah.
the first week you could cut out, it depends on what you eat, obviously,
Yeah.
what you're starting off with. But one plan would be to cut out everything sweet, naturally sweet. You know, you wouldn't cut out bread and pasta and rice and potatoes if that's what you eat, but you would cut out, you know, you might have your Weetabix with no sugar on it, and you might have, you know, toast with peanut butter rather than jam or whatever, and gradually cut it out over the course of a month. Because obviously the Kick Sugar program is quicker than that.
It's quicker. It's 2 weeks. It's 2 weeks, but we're allowing fruit, so you get natural fruit sugar. But also, we get people to do the diary beforehand for 3 days to see what they're actually eating and drinking, and then afterwards as well. But as you say, it depends on what level you started at. If you're drinking 5 or 6 cans of Coke a day, to go to 0, you're going to find it a big shock. So it's a matter of where your baseline is and taking it down slowly. And that's the same thing with sort of artificial sweeteners. If somebody's on full fat Coca-Cola, I'm happy for them to go down to the diet drink slowly and get them off. Eventually, I want no artificial sweeteners and no sweeteners, but there has to be a program to make it accessible for everyone and also make it flexible. It's not very rigid.
Yeah. And some people's personalities really lend themselves to doing things suddenly and now. And sometimes they do really, really well. You know, some people do just cut it all out, and they know they're going to have terrible headaches. And maybe at this time when you can't go anywhere, it's not a bad time to actually think, well, I'm just going to put up with it. I'd rather have a lot at once rather than spreading it out.
What's the cause of the headaches and the flu-like system? Is that just because your body is so used to something and you're suddenly getting rid of it? Is there a physiological reason?
Well, you can be a sugar burner. There are 2 fuels really. The fat, you can use fat or sugar as fuels. And when you burn fat, you produce something called ketones, which is quite a clean fuel for the brain. But it's a massive change for the body to go from being a big sugar burner where every couple of hours you're feeding yourself with sugary food or starchy food, to a fat burner where you might only be having 2 or 3 meals a day with no snacks. And that is just, you know, that does produce its own problems. So when I did do it more slowly. I actually, when I did it, I didn't know it would work. As in, I gradually cut out sweet stuff, and then I gradually cut out pasta, bread, potatoes, and all that sort of thing. And I gradually did it over the course of probably all in, it was probably 6 months, so a very long time, long enough to get no side effects at all.
Right.
But quite a few of my patients wouldn't do that. They'd much rather just make a sudden change. So if they do, they will get side effects. But I'm not completely sure of all the mechanisms. I'm not sure they're all known, to be honest. It's just a really big change going from being a sugar burner to a fat burner.
And the best thing they can do is just drink lots of water, and if they need analgesic for the headaches, then take it, but just keep drinking out the water.
Yeah, some people have bone broth as well, and they find that helpful. It sort of, I suppose it feels a bit medicinal. But yeah, and salt. You do need some extra salt, and the bone broth will have some salt in it, so that seems to be quite helpful.
And what's your thoughts on with sort of fruits? Because we allow sort of some fruits in the program. What are your thoughts on fruits and berries and things?
Yeah, so it depends how metabolically flexible you are. So if you're fit and healthy, nothing wrong with you, you're not on any medication, you've got no signs of disease, as in you don't have anything wrong with your skin, you don't have anything wrong with your bowels, you don't have anything wrong with your lungs, you know, you're fit and healthy. If you're a fit and healthy person with absolutely nothing wrong with any part of your body, having fruit with meals, fine. Yeah. Having fruit as snacks is problematic. So the 5 a day where people have 3 meals and actually spread out 5 pieces of fruit through the day means you'll obviously be aware of that. But I have to point out to my patients that that's not a healthy way to do things, because every time you eat something sweet, it's not really that satisfying. It gives you more of a kick. And it sort of feels healthy, but it isn't. And so, you know, when your blood sugar drops after having a banana or something, you may well be hungry and want to eat again. Well, you'd be much better off, in my book, having a hard-boiled egg or some hummus and some veggie sticks or something like that. So it's interesting really about fruit. I say to people in my groups, how many of you love fruit? And I'd say probably 8 out of 10 people will put their hands up. And then I'll say, does anybody hate fruit? And probably less than that. You know, you might get some people who eat it under sufferance, but you occasionally get people who hate fruit. And I say, I release you from the need to eat any fruit for the whole of your life. You don't need to eat fruit to be healthy. It's not an essential sort of piece of food, whatever. You know, it's just not essential. That's not very well put, but it's just not an essential thing to eat. There are essential proteins, essential fats, but there are no essential fruits. But that said, people love fruit. It makes them feel good. It's bright and it's jolly and it tastes nice, and it's a good substitute for a sugary pudding. And that's how I see it, really. It's use it sparingly. If you're very sensitive, if you're a diabetic person, you might not be able to keep your blood sugar normal with fruit. Certainly not if it's in the middle of in between a meal. But tagged onto a meal, it might be okay. You just need to see. So berries are the best fruit, and have berries with a little bit of cream or a little bit of yogurt, and plain ordinary yogurt, and that will tend to reduce the rise in your blood sugar if you eat fruit.
Brilliant. Really, really good tip. So thank you so much for your time, Joanne. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way they can get in touch with you?
So I've got an NHS Net email address, and it's Joanne McCormack, JoanneMcCormack @nhs.net. You'll see me on the Public Health Collaboration website, which is in behind, which is phcuk.org. And my website you mentioned and I mentioned before, fatismyfriend.co.uk, which I set up to put in links. You see, as GPs, we don't have very long with the patient. We've only got 10 minutes. And so there's so much really to discuss and information you could give them. So my website has links to all the websites I think are good in terms of keeping your sugar low. Websites like Diet Doctor and Ditch the Carbs and many others, and inspirational people as well who've changed their lifestyles.
Brilliant. It's been really, really great talking to you as ever. I'm going to put all the links below, so if anyone wants them, and hopefully we can get the copy of your letter that you give to the GPs to try and get people slowly off sugar as well, especially if they're in different medications. So thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to me. Hopefully we'll see each other face to face very soon.